Well, to a bombshell new report from journalist Stephen Baker, who says that General Mark Milley, during the January 6th protests, used directed energy weapons against those protesters. In fact, many months later, boasted about it. Directed energy weapons to break up the protests. How exactly do these work? This is a stunning admission. And Steve has been working on this report for, I believe, 2 years of journalism to get to the bottom of this. And Steve Baker from Blaze Media joins us now. Steve, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. This is a stunning report, and when I saw you first posting about this, I was shocked. Can you just walk me through the pieces of this and how these directed energy weapons were deployed against these protesters?
Well, here's what we don't know. Let me start there. We don't know to what extent they were used, at least on the DoD side of things. We do know that LRADs, or the audio versions, were in fact used by the United States Park Police. So this is where it gets so confusing, Clayton, is because there's so many distinctions between these types of weapons. What we do know is that Mark Milley was in fact in a meeting, this was just this past fall in 2024, with about 20 other active duty officers, one of them being our source for this story, in which he was either bragging or just mentioning in casual discussion, whatever the case may be, that they had authorized or signed off on the use of both, as he said, heat and sound weapons to be used at Lafayette Square Park on June 1st, 2020. That was, of course, the famous scene where Trump walked across the street. He had the Bible, he held the Bible up over his head, that sort of thing. We've got confirmation from a Department of Interior IG report out the police version of these audio weapons being used. And we have no confirmation yet, either by video or otherwise, of the DoD versions being used. But if the DoD versions were just authorized for deployment, that meant it was intended to be used. And if DoD was firing on United States citizens on the streets of America, in our capital, we have some serious questions to ask.
Right, and so to be clear, these weapons were used, according to your reports, in June of 2020. Do we have any evidence at all that these may have been used in any capacity on January 6th?
Part 2 of our story is going to address that. I don't mind going ahead and telling you right now that we are going to provide evidence of the same type of system that was used by United States Park Police was in fact used on January 6th. We have the video evidence of that, and we'll be presenting that.
Wow. Well, that's unbelievable. And so let's talk about some of these heated weapons here, because I have to say, when I read your report, I kind of got up in the middle of the night and I kind of had a moment, because 11 years ago, when I worked at Fox News, we covered a report about these new DoD directed energy weapons that were being developed. And they invited the press to kind of come and test them out. And my colleague at the time, Peter Doocy, got to try these out. And he talked about how incredibly unpleasant they were. I just want to roll this tape from 11 years ago. Forgive how young I look. Watch.
The U.S. military revealing its brand new crowd control instrument that could also protect U.S. ships from pirates, the very Intrepid. Peter Doocy volunteering to test this thing out, Allie.
And no, he was not the guy doing the shooting. He was actually shot at, and Peter's going to tell us what it felt like and show us that moment. Peter, take it away.
Allison, I'll tell you first that I learned this week firsthand. Non-lethal also means not pleasant. Look at this.
You can't see it, hear it, or smell it, but it makes unruly mobs do this.
So is that the same thing we're talking about here, Steve?
No, there's actually 3 different types of these directed energy weapons that we are going to be revealing through this series on that topic at the Blaze. The first type is the type that very young Peter Doocy introduced right there. Now, there are actually YouTube videos going back decades of DoD actually showing videos of these being used. Even Congress members allowing those to be demonstrated upon them. And the same exact reaction that Peter had in that video, they had as well. So these are pulse RF frequency microwave energy bursts that are delivered for just a couple of quick seconds. It heats up the outer layer of your skin. It gets very hot, very uncomfortable, very quickly. They can be used in battlefield situations. They can be used for riot control. We have seen those used in various locations around the country over the years. Now, the audio versions are not quite as painful in that manner, but they're so intense and so loud, and the right frequencies are being used that creates literal pain in your head and in your eardrums, and it creates the same effect. It creates confusion, pain, and ostensibly, and the intent is for the riotous behavior. Those behaving riotously, they are forced to run the opposite direction. We also know now that, of course, we've heard a lot of news lately over the last few years about this Havana syndrome type weapons that are being used overseas against our State Department, our intelligence community, that sort of thing, our foreign affairs operatives that work overseas, legitimate jobs that our government performs overseas. Catherine Herridge a week or so ago had a big reveal about that. She had a CIA whistleblower come out talking about these, what they call anomalous health incidences related to Havana syndrome. So that's a second class of these DEW weapons. Then we have what we're defining. This is the blaze. I know the scientists are not going to like me for we're categorizing it ourselves just for public consumption and to make it easier, because it gets really esoteric on the science side of things. But the third class, or what we are learning from our sources at both DoD and inside the intelligence community, are a class of what they're called agitation weapons. Now, these are not the big truck-mounted weapons like you saw hit Ducey with that blast of radiation that heated up his skin on one side of his body. But these are backpack size. The miniaturization has allowed the capability to produce sufficient energy that an individual, an operative, can wear these in a backpack. The antenna can be mounted in the breastplate of their body armor, and then they can send over RF frequencies that can be highly attenuated to affect certain types of organs in the body. So, and I do everything in my power to actually make this as easily comprehensible as possible, both for myself and for the audience. But imagine if you're sitting in, your old 1984 pickup truck or whatever, and you got an antenna, coming out of the side, outside the window of the truck, and you turn on your AM or your FM radio dial. And the reason why you're able to hear that and those radio frequencies don't affect us is the AM and FM frequency range do not affect the human body, but that antenna resonates to those frequencies and then sends them down to your radio, which interprets that, and then you can pick out the specific frequency and you can hear the music or the talk radio, or back then Rush Limbaugh and in 94 or whatever. And so that is what radio frequencies do. What scientists have discovered, particularly in the Defense Department, not only our own, but also overseas, this technology actually began in the Soviet Union. They were tip of the spear. They were on the front line of this, going all the way back to the 50s. They were working on what's called psychotronic weapons. Psychotronic, not psychotropic, psychotronic weapons. These were radio and or audio weapons that would identify what organs in our body responded to certain radio frequencies. And then it was the matter of delivering that. So this is where we get into Havana syndrome as well. That's why these people that have been subjected to and have developed these AHIs, or anomalous health incidences, have long-term damage, either confusion, memory loss. Some of them cannot even remember being in State Department service anymore. They don't even recall their time in in service. These are being directed at our best and our brightest. They're not being directed at the diplomat corps necessarily. When I say the diplomat corps, I'm talking about the ambassadors. Ambassadors are political appointees. They're not the people who get the job done. These weapons are being directed at the people who actually do work overseas, do the good work overseas, and that they need to be taken out. And so now we're getting into the agitation weapons, which are the smaller miniaturized version, which have been developed for both battlefield and also for close quarter urban conflict, riots, where they can actually create behaviors in individuals by attenuating a very, very tight and certain frequency range that can make your heart resonate. They can stop heartbeats. They can resonate with the lungs at a different attenuation. They can make you have trouble breathing. And the really frightening part is, well, not that stopping your heart isn't pretty frightening, but also they can actually make the different folds of your brain at different frequencies, different folds resonate at different attenuation of this particular frequency range, and can cause confusion, agitation, violence, and hearing voices in your head. And now we know beyond any shadow of a doubt that this classification of these weapons actually exist. And we're not the only ones that have them.
And we're not the only ones that have them. I highly doubt that we'd be the only ones that would have these at this point. I have to say, just kind of as a side note here, Steve, I've spoken to whistleblowers who have told me they were about to come forward. These are separate whistleblowers at separate parts of the country. They were about to come forward on a specific issue, and at almost at the same time, they were hit with some crazy affliction. And they sort of joked to me, they sort of joked to me that we hear about this Havana syndrome. I'm not so, I believe it now. They were simultaneously hit almost with the exact same affliction, thousands of miles apart in the United States. So I'm not surprised by it at all. And here on this show, conspiracy theories are just 6-month spoiler alerts. But I have to ask you, just on the legal side of this, I mean, I'm not a constitutional expert, but from what I understand, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, any other branches of the military aren't allowed to enforce domestic laws under the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. They're not allowed to unless they have authorization by Congress to basically attack United States citizens. So does the Department of Defense have some sort of legal authority to use these directed energy weapons on Americans?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now that, like yourself, I don't do UFO tinfoil hat type work. If you go read our article, everything that we reveal there is based on direct sourcing from active duty military or retired military and intelligence community sources. It's congressional hearing testimonies that we quote directly on these weapons projects, as well as the actual data that's archived. There's tons and tons of unclassified information about the historical development, use, and research development of all of these classes of directed energy weapons. That's where we're pulling this from. We're not pulling it out of our ass. All right, we're not making this up as we go. We're doing everything we can to avoid even getting into that area. So now, to getting directly into your question here about deployment of these by our own agencies against American people, especially military, I will challenge you to look up a phrase. In fact, I'll just set your audience off, and if anybody finds anything or anybody wants to contact me or you on that, and I hope you'll share with me the messages. Look up the phrase "ostensibly separated from the Army." This is a active duty, well-known phraseology in not only our intelligence community, but also in our special operations, particularly the more dark side of our special operation forces, in which they are working under either an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding of the CIA in foreign activities, or with the FBI in domestic activities, in which they are ostensibly separated from the Army, or they become temporarily and ostensibly separated. And then suddenly, magically, they're back at their base, just outside Washington, D.C., Belvoir and Meade, and suddenly they're ostensibly reactivated again.
So a private military contractor working, in a combat zone might be ostensibly separated from the military. It operates independently of, but then gets absorbed back into the military, so they don't have to abide by the Constitution, essentially.
Yeah, they've learned how to do this in foreign actions and activities where we're not supposed to be anyway. I mean, we don't have legal right to be operating in this particular hot spot or zone or whatever it is that our IC community and our special operatives are working in from the DoD. And so just the fact that we don't have permission to be there, they become ostensibly separated for a period of time. Might be for a day, might be for a month or two, but they become ostensibly separated. That where it's essentially just a plausible deniability, a trope is all that is. And then they're absorbed back in legally and technically, and they're back in the Army again. And it's the way it works. And unfortunately, we now know that this is happening here as well.
I was going to say, I could understand them trying to pull this off in the Congo, but Lafayette Square and on the mall at Capitol Hill is maybe not going to fly with members of Congress. Have you spoken to any, you can tell me, or you can not tell me on the record or not, have you spoken to any members of Congress about this, whether or not they plan to hold any kind of investigation?
No, we have, as a matter of fact, I was just in 2 congressional offices this week on Tuesday. I was up in D.C. for January 6 affairs, the four-year commemorative events and things of that nature. Participating myself, as you know, it was a grand up yours to the Department of Justice for me to be sitting in the press gallery inside the House chamber during the certification of the Electoral College vote on Monday. And then Tuesday, I had meetings with congressional staffers and congressmen on this particular issue.
Well, Steve, amazing work. I know it's been a whirlwind for you, and I'll be respectful of your time and get you out of here. We'll be looking for the second piece of this story. Can you let us know when that's about to drop?
As it was with the first part one, they put us through multiple layers of editorial review on a story like this, and then it gets triggered by legal as well. So I had anticipation that the last one was going to come out a few days earlier than it actually dropped. So if I predicted, I might be wrong, but it would be, my hopes are that probably by the first of the week.
Great. Well, unbelievable work here, Steve. Thank you for this, and thanks for the great journalism as always. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Clayton.